know, when it comes to summer fragrance, there is absolutely nothing to beat lilies, and there are a few lilies, I reckon, that beat Casablanca. Pure white flowers and the most nose-tingling scent. But it's on its last legs now. The flowers are beginning to fade, and I've got to take care of the plant until it can produce its flowers again next summer. So what do? Well, the easiest thing to do is very little for now. Don't chop these stems of green leaves off until the leaves have faded and gone brown. And then you can cut them off about 2 inches above compost level and stand them next to the house wall. They need no protections for the winter at all, except that the wall will give them. And when they start to grow away again next spring, then you can top dress them. If you want more bulbs, of course you can buy them, but you can also propagate from scales. Now this is a typical lily bulb with big fat scales. Unlike a daffodil, where the scales are right the way round, these are quite loose individuals, and each of these is capable of making a new bulb. All you need to do is to snap them off like that, and you can take as many as you want if you want to demolish the bulb. Otherwise, take half a dozen. That will leave you with a bulb which you can still grow on next spring, but also 6 potential new plants. Get some multi-purpose potting compost and some perlite or sharp grit. Mix the two together. The perlite here is just opening up the compost and making sure it'll be really well drained, and the compost imparts its own moisture to the perlite, so it's the perfect mix. What you need now is a polythene bag. Put a few handfuls of the mixture into the bag. Now, I know I don't need to remind you to keep these bags away from kids. When you've done that, drop the scales in. And then shake it all about. Now, I'm not joking, I'm not having you on here. Move that all about a bit, and then blow into the bag. Tie a knot in the top to seal in the air. Now it needs to go in a temperature of about 21 degrees Celsius, that's 70 degrees Fahrenheit. A propagator or the airing cupboard will do for 6 to 8 weeks, and after that time, at the bottom of each of those scales, you'll find that a tiny little bulblet is beginning to form. Pot up the scales then into small pots of compost and grow them on in your greenhouse. They will eventually produce little bulbs like this in about a year's time, which will turn in 3 or 4 years' time into bulbs that big. All right, so you need patience, but they're all for free. This is one way of starting your own cottage industry at home. The nursery trade, of course, does things on a much larger scale.
Whatever the time of year, garden centres always seem to be packed to the gunnels with gorgeous-looking plants. But have you ever stopped to consider just what goes into producing them? Blakedown Nurseries in the Midlands is one of Britain's largest wholesale nurseries, producing plants for garden centres up and down the country.
Well, the nursery operation is in excess of 100 acres. We have 4 or 5 acres of glass, 8 acres of polythene, and we would grow 1,200 different species, genera and varieties.
Now, your company introduces a lot of new plants into the garden centres, but how do you actually decide which are going to be worth people having and which are going to be worth your while producing in such quantities?
Well, we have a very comprehensive trialling arrangements in a specialised department, and we can take up to 8 years from the time we find a plant to the time that we bring it to the market. At that stage, we will then know whether we can grow it and whether it'll grow well in British gardens.
Yeah.
This is where it all starts. This is the propagation department.
By the looks of it, most of the propagation is done by cuttings. Is that actually true, or do you also raise quite a lot of plants from seed?
No, that's correct. 95% would be from cuttings, with the other 5% or so from seed.
Now, you've got, what, 8 people in here doing all that work. What's the kind of output per person per day?
Well, it'll depend on the plant, and needless to say, depend on the person who's in the output. But an average would be 3,500 cuttings for every person in the room.
Now, if I was raising plants from cuttings, you know, and I took a handful from a single stock plant, I'd feel pretty proud of myself. What are your aims from, say, one original plant?
Well, from a new plant, we have to firstly build the stock up. And before then we can put it into the market, we have to have a lot of plants.
Yeah.
So as an example, Phygelius sensation, which we introduced this year, we had 45,000 cuttings, 45,000 plants from the original plant.
Plants are grown on, often for 2 years or more, and once they reach a certain size, they're moved on to a 43-acre site at nearby Yielding Tree. With this volume of plants, you must surely have a good amount of specialist equipment and machinery here.
Yes, we do, because we handle so many plants. We do all our potting with a potting machine. That does about 8,000 pots a day.
Do you have a kind of preferred type of compost you use?
Well, we have a basic peat and grit mix, but we have up to 10 variants on that with different fertilisers and different chemicals in it, depending on where the plants are going to grow or the type of plant.
So there's obviously a lot of work involved, but at what stage do you have to reach before you can sell those plants?
Well, firstly, they've got to be saleable. I mean, that is a very good example of a saleable berberis. That's ready to go to the garden centre. But we've still got a lot of work to do on it. If there's any weeds, which there are a few in here, we'd take those out. We have to clean the pot, put a barcode label onto the pot, usually put a coloured label onto the plant, put that onto a trolley, shrink wrap the trolley so the plants don't shake about in transit, then put that on the trolley onto a lorry and deliver it to the garden centre.
I think that having a little wildlife pond like this would be a harmless enough pursuit that could never get you into any trouble, wouldn't you? Don't you believe it? Public enemy number 1 is present here in my wildlife pool, and this is it. Parrot's feather, bought innocently at a local garden centre because I thought the foliage was really rather fluffy and nice. I discover now from the authorities that this is becoming an invasive waterweed of canals, lakes, watercourses all over Britain, and it's choking them to death. They reckon it shouldn't be grown in the garden, but that you should pull it out of your pond and compost it. Just as I was enjoying it so much. Parrot's feather isn't the only problem waterweed. Floating pennywort is almost impossible to control, and it grows at between 10 and 20 centimetres per day. It forms dense carpets over the surface of the water and deoxygenates the water for fish and invertebrates. Avoid, too, the Australian swamp stone crop. It's been here since 1911, but it's only recently caused problems. By far the most common problem in most garden pools is green water. How do you keep it clear? Well, the answer is always balance. You need a reasonable covering of surface floaters so there's not too much sun hitting the water, and underneath the surface, submerged oxygenators that really do pump their oxygen into the water and keep it clear. But small ponds are infinitely more difficult to keep not pea soup green than our large ones, and there's now help at hand. Now, it's been known for a while that barley straw, the stalks from barley, put into a garden pond, discourage algae. They act as an algicide. What they've discovered recently is that if you add lavender stalks to the barley straw, it's even more effective. It acts more quickly and it lasts far longer. So now you can buy this neat little kit, which is a pad of barley straw and lavender stalks, and it fits in this framework here. You snap the top onto it, like so. Make sure all those things are popped in. And then, I haven't lost my marbles, I've got them here. In a bag, they come with the kit and a piece of string. And what you need to do is to thread this string through the hole. This is the most difficult bit of the lot. Tie a knot in it, and the length of the string is critical because when this is dropped into the water, the top surface there has to be between 2 and 8 inches below the surface of the water, so the light is right to allow this anti-algal activity to take place. You'll find instructions with each kit as to how often you need to replace the pads and how many of them you'll need for a pond of a given surface area. But however large or small your pond, I think it's the planting around it that always makes it or mars it. And we all love marginal aquatics. A lot of people forget that there are bulbs you can plant in the moist soil around a pond. Things like Camassia, the quamash, with its tall spires of almost electric blue starry flowers. And this, which is Leucojum, the snowflake, dangling bells of white, tipped with bright green. And I'm putting these in right now, in between primulas like Primula vialii, which is, I hope, going to shed some seeds onto the soil, and a fern. And these two will take over from the bulbs once they've faded. The soil is damp but workable, and that's what both Chamassias and Leucodiums like. And I'm digging a hole about 3 or 4 inches deep to slip the bulb in and push back the earth over the top. I'm going to space them about 6 inches apart. Should do them nicely. And then, next spring, I shall have earlier colour here than I've ever had before with the primulas and the ferns. Joe Swift and Gay Search have got more ideas for marginal planting in their new water garden.
The stream looks great now it's finished.
Yeah.
Flowing away like a good one.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy with it. It's always really exciting to turn the pump on for the first time. You feel like a little kid, you know.
Fingers crossed.
And yeah, you just hope it's all going to work and that you get the right sounds and the right movement.
If you have soil on the margins of your stream, then you can plant direct into that. But we don't, so I'm going to use these black plastic mesh baskets lined with just a little bit of hessian. The compost I'm using here is a special aquatic compost. Now, I could have used ordinary garden soil, well sieved, but what I couldn't do is use ordinary potting compost. That's far too rich in nutrients, and that would encourage the algae in the water to grow and turn it green. Now, this plant is one of my favourites, Pontidaria cordata, or the pickerel weed. It has these lovely, long, elegant, spear-shaped leaves, and also a very pretty blue flower. I think we'll get another one in here. And this final one for the middle. Like that. Pack it around with compost, and then you need to just neaten down the hessian, tuck it out of sight, or trim it off. And the final touch, some gravel for the top. That will stop the compost washing away. And if you have fish in your pond, it'll also stop the fish nosing about in the compost. And it actually looks very pretty too. Because we've got such strong horizontal lines in the stream, we need some equally strong verticals to balance it and to break that line. So we're using iris, this lovely variegated iris, Iris pseudochorus variegatus, and a relative of the reed mace, Tifa angustifolia, which has the most beautiful, elegant, slender leaves. And it's a lovely airy plant that moves in the wind and doesn't block what's behind it. Pop him in there.
What do you think, one of these Pontidaria here, Gay?
Yeah, I just thought in the front there.
Yeah?
That one, yeah, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
and then maybe an iris in the corner
mix
here.
it up a bit.
Can't have too much planting here because the stream's falling right down on top of them.
Yeah, that's nice, that one.
Yeah, that's all right.
They look good.
And then we can bulk it up more on that side, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Don't you? The plants we've got in so far are marginal plants, which means they like growing in between 1 inch and 6 inches of water. So they're on the shelf around the edge of our pond. We've got the Iris snowdrift, lovely white flowered one there, and Sagittaria, the arrowhead, which has these wonderful architectural leaves. Schoenoplexus zebrinus, a bit of a mouthful, but it's a lovely grass. It's bands of white up its length. And the arum lily, Xantodeschia, very small at the moment, but they will fill this corner with their lovely huge leaves and big white creamy spathes. But we do have some deep water aquatics as well, and there's a very simple way of putting them in their place. You may wonder why we're going to all this bother for a dead plant, but in fact, of course, it isn't dead. It's resting. It's the water hawthorn, Propagating, and it flowers in the spring, then it dies back, which is what it's doing now, and then it flowers again in the winter. And in fact, it's the only deep water aquatic that does flower in the winter. There we go. The secret here is that you've actually made 3 narrow ponds that actually flow into each other rather than a stream. I think people think they've got a slope, they can just run the water down, but of course once the pump's turned off,
That's right.
you get bare stream.
No,
and
that's
pool
right.
at the bottom.
They're 3, they've got to be 3 independent ponds. I didn't want overly natural feel, you know, with too much natural stone or pretending it was just water coming from nowhere,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So it's obviously man-made, and it feels like the top ponds,
Yeah.
you know, naturally
Yeah.
coming into this space
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm delighted with the overall effect.
Now, if your borders are beginning to look like mine, what my dad used to call a bit back-endish, you're probably tempted to ignore them and just cut them all down come the autumn, when you can dig up, divide and replant those that are overcrowded. But I reckon with the early flowering perennials that gave their all in June and July, now is about the best time to chop them back, dig up and divide them, because that way they establish themselves in warm, damp soil much more rapidly than if you leave the job until November. Now, with things like this skullcap or scutularia, scissor it off with a pair of shears about 2 inches above ground level, and then pull out the way all those scissored stems. Now, this is one of those plants that makes really quite tidy clumps. They don't spread terribly far, but you can still make a lot of plants out of them by prising up this rootstock and then splitting it. Shake off some of the soil. Might be small, but it's a tough little blighter. Use a knife to cut it into smaller portions and make sure that each section has got a shoot on it so you know it's going to grow away. And cut through those roots, pulling them into clumplets like that. You end up with 3 clumps for the price of 1. Now, the secret of getting them to grow away rapidly is, without sounding boring, soil preparation. It needs to be well forked over, and in order to hold on to moisture well and get them encouraging roots, plenty of this well-rotted stable manure. He's touching it with his hands. It's lovely stuff. I shall wash before tea. Sprinkle it on the surface and then fork it in. Then you can plant them. And when it's this soft and this well worked, you can plant with your hands. Scoop it out. You don't need a trowel. Hands were made before trowels. And make sure that the crown of the plant, sits just at soil level, not too far below. You can space them about a foot apart, and that way they'll cover the ground quite quickly, but still have room to develop. Turn back the earth around them, and all they need now is a watering in. And with the warm weather to come before autumn really sets in, they'll become established beautifully and flower really well next year.
There's a changeover period sometime in July when all the colourful perennials of early summer start petering out. So to keep the garden chirpy, you've really got to programme a second wave. And to find some of the best plants, I've come here to Newby Hall near Ripon in Yorkshire. The design of the present garden is largely the work of the late Edward Compton, heavily influenced by his friend Lawrence Johnston, the creator of Hidcote. And you can see the inspiration of that famous Cotswold garden in its formal plan of rooms and corridors. But more recently, Newby has acquired a rich plantsman's overlay, thanks to the enthusiasm of his son, Robin Compton, who took over the garden in 1977. It was your father that put the borders in originally, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right, Steve. He did. This was his great creation, the grand design. You'd hardly believe it, but looking behind us, the garden ended at the lily pond right behind us. And this was a 9-hole golf course when I was a boy. It takes a lot of believing, but it's true. And then, about 9 years later, about 1930, he started to plan and plant. And this was the central axis of his design, rather a la Hidcote. He was a great friend of Johnny Johnson at Hidcote, and much influenced by that. He wanted a main central axis, and then off it, compartmented gardens.
And is the planting scheme today much as he had it?
No, I would say substantially different, because when he died, a lot of the plants were dying and they looked decrepit and the soil needed renovating, so he really started from scratch.
And what sort of season do they have?
Well, they last a good 2 months.
Right.
They come in about August and they go right through ready till the frost. Something is still in flower in late September. How about this? This is a crowd stopper.
That's
Steve,
excellent,
isn't it? They all think that those are coloured petals. Of course, they're not. They're, as you know, they're comas. In fact, that's salvia viridis, which, of course, you know, means green.
One or two things are really coming now, aren't they, like the echinacea?
Isn't that a good plant? And the blue stems of the eryngium here, I love that clear, steely blue.
Violas go on and on, don't they? Is that an annual one or a...
Yes, it is an annual, Stephen. That's singing the blues.
Oh.
How about that, then?
Not as bad as flocks of sheep.
Oh, don't. And now, Stephen, we've come to the autumn garden. And this used to be a croquet lawn in my father's day. And, of course, this is full of lovely autumnal plants.
And absolutely humming with bees.
Isn't it? Look at that.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that is, I know you know it well, Stephen. That's Monada didyma prairie night. And the English name, of course, is bee balm.
And a good splash of pink here on the corner with a hebe. Which
Yes,
is this?
indeed. That's Hebe Great Orm.
Right.
And flowering very well.
And with the clematis behind.
And the clematis, that's one of my favourite clematis. That's Texensis Etoile Rose. Such a pretty shaped flower and a lovely pink leading through, as you're right to say.
And all connecting with this salvia.
Yes, isn't this a nice one? This is Salvia involucrata Hadspin.
And salvia is, of course, one of your great interests.
Indeed, you're right in saying that. And my son Jamie, whom I believe you know, has really influenced me largely.
Because he's been out collecting them in the wild, hasn't he?
He has, yes,
Bringing some very good ones back.
Absolutely. Yes, he went in 1991 to Mexico, the CDR accommodation, Compton Darcy Ricks, and they came back with some very unusual salvias.
For me, the really fantastic one he brought back is the giant patens.
Isn't it lovely? Yes, that, I don't know if you speak it in Spanish.
I do.
They found that in the Sierra de Guanajuato, and that's why they call it Guanajuato.
And the red over there, that's named after John Darcy, one of the other
Absolutely
members
right.
of the team.
One of the, indeed, invaluable members of the team. And it's a glorious plant, isn't it? Good, clear red.
Yeah.
Well, now, this is one of my favourites, Stephen. This is Salvia cacalifolia. And we talk about the range of colour. Look at the depth of blue there compared to the raspberry royal, which we got here. Why the salvias are so important to me is they give this tremendous width, not only of diversity of shape, but of colour.
Yeah.
And I would be lost without them.
And they do go on and on just when
go-
you want the colour to come into a garden, don't they?
Absolutely.
Whatever the weather this weekend, enjoy your garden. Ta-da.